I dragged myself through the front door after a 20-hour nursing shift, my scrubs still damp with sweat and coffee stains. The kitchen light was on. Something looked different. There, against the wall where my little breakfast table used to be, stood a brand new stainless steel refrigerator. My daughter-in-law Amber stood beside it, arms crossed, a cold smile on her face. "That fridge is mine," she announced. "From now on, you buy your own food." I blinked. Certain exhaustion was playing tricks on my mind. But the refrigerator was real. So was Amber's expression. I set my purse down on the counter, trying to process what I was seeing. My breakfast table, the small oak one, where I'd eaten my morning toast for 27 years, was gone. In its place stood this gleaming appliance that definitely hadn't been there when I left for my double shift yesterday morning. "I don't understand," I said slowly, my voice hoarse from fatigue. "Where did this come from?" Amber walked over to the refrigerator and opened it with a flourish. Inside, I could see it was already fully stocked with groceries. Fancy yogurts, organic vegetables, expensive cuts of meat, imported cheeses. The kind of food I couldn't afford on my nursing salary. "Gary and I decided we needed our own space," she explained, her tone suggesting she was speaking to a child. "Our own food storage. You understand?" I looked past her to our original refrigerator, the white one I'd bought 10 years ago when the old one finally died. Amber walked over and opened that one too. My heart sank. Nearly every item inside had a sticky note attached to it. Pink sticky notes, all written in Amber's neat handwriting. Amber's "do not touch." The milk I'd bought 3 days ago, the eggs, the butter, the loaf of bread from the bakery section, even the jar of pickles I'd opened last week. "Amber, I bought those groceries," I said, pointing at the milk. "That's my food." She shrugged, closing the refrigerator door. "Well, Gary and I have been doing most of the shopping lately. We decided it's easier if we keep track of what's ours, to avoid confusion." That wasn't true. I'd been buying groceries every week, hauling bags up the porch steps after my shifts, stocking the fridge and pantry. But I was too tired to argue. My feet ached. My back ached. I'd spent the last 20 hours caring for post-surgical patients, changing dressings, administering medications, holding the hands of frightened people who needed comfort in the middle of the night. "Where's Gary?" I asked. As if summoned, my son appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was 32 years old, tall like his father had been, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He stood there in his sweatpants and t-shirt, looking at the floor. "Gary, honey, what's going on?" I asked. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Mom, Amber has a point. We all live here together. We should have boundaries." Boundaries? In my house. The house I'd bought 30 years ago with the life insurance money after his father died of a sudden heart attack. The house where I'd raised Gary alone, working double shifts to keep the mortgage paid, to put food on the table, to save for his college education. "This is my home," I said quietly. "You two moved in 6 months ago. It was supposed to be temporary, until Gary found a new job." Amber's expression hardened. "Well, circumstances change, Deborah. We're family now. We all need to adjust." She'd never called me Mom, not once in the 2 years since she married Gary. Always Deborah, spoken with just a hint of condescension. "Look, I'm exhausted," I said, rubbing my temples where a headache was forming. "Can we talk about this tomorrow?" "There's nothing to talk about," Amber replied. "I gave you a shelf, top right corner. That's your space now." I walked over to the original refrigerator and opened it again. She was right. In the top right corner, cleared of everything except one lonely shelf, was apparently my allotted space. About 18 inches of wire rack. "One shelf?" I said. "For all my food?" "You're just one person," Amber said brightly. "How much do you really need?" I closed the refrigerator door and looked at my son. Really looked at him. Searched his face for the boy who used to hug me tight after school, who used to help me plant tomatoes in the backyard, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. But that boy was gone. This man standing before me was a stranger. "Gary?" I said, my voice breaking slightly. He finally looked at me. "Mom, just try to understand, okay? It'll be fine." Then he turned and left the kitchen. I heard him and Amber go upstairs to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The one they'd taken over 3 months ago because it was bigger and had the attached bathroom. I'd moved into the smaller guest room without complaint because I wanted them to be comfortable. I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at the 2 refrigerators. The fancy new one that was off limits. The old one where I was permitted a single shelf. I wanted to cry, but I was too tired even for tears. Instead, I trudged to my small bedroom, peeled off my scrubs, and collapsed onto the bed. The next morning, I woke early despite my exhaustion. Decades of nursing shifts had trained my body to function on minimal sleep. I walked downstairs, hoping yesterday had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. It wasn't. Both refrigerators stood exactly where they'd been. I went to make coffee, my usual morning ritual. But when I reached the cabinet where I kept the coffee maker, I found a small combination lock hanging from the handle. I stood there, staring at it stupidly. A lock. On my kitchen cabinet. "Oh, you're up." Amber's voice came from behind me. She was already dressed, looking fresh in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. I should have mentioned, Gary and I installed locks on a few cabinets. "Why?" I asked, still staring at the lock. "Well, we calculated the electricity usage, and the coffee maker draws quite a bit of power. Since you're only contributing minimally to the household expenses, we thought it was fair to limit access to high-consumption appliances." I turned to face her. "Minimally? Amber, I pay the mortgage. I pay the utilities. The bills are all in my name." She smiled that cold smile again. "But Gary has been helping with groceries, and we've been maintaining the house. That has value too, you know. Emotional labor, household management. We think it's only fair that you contribute more financially if you want full access to everything." My hands started shaking. Not from fear, from rage. Pure, white-hot rage that I forced myself to swallow down. "I see," I said carefully. "And what do I need to do to access my coffee maker?" "Well, we can discuss a monthly contribution. Say, $500? Then you can have the combination. $500. On top of the mortgage, utilities, property taxes, and my own food that I apparently now had to buy separately. While working 60-hour weeks at the hospital to keep everyone afloat. "I'll think about it," I said. I grabbed my purse and left for work without breakfast or coffee. I stopped at a gas station and bought a cup of terrible, burnt coffee that cost $3. It tasted like betrayal. The next few weeks were surreal. I started keeping a small electric kettle and instant coffee in my bedroom, hidden in my closet like contraband. I bought a tiny cooler and kept it stocked with ice packs so I could store my meager groceries without relying on my designated shelf, which seemed to shrink every day as Amber's labeled items encroached on my space. I worked extra shifts at the hospital, picking up hours whenever they were available. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed the money. My paychecks, which used to cover everything comfortably, now barely stretched far enough. I was buying my own groceries, keeping all my receipts in a folder to prove I was contributing, but it never seemed to be enough. One evening, I came home to find Amber waiting for me in the living room. She had a sheet of paper in her hand, and a calculator, on the coffee table. "Deborah, we need to talk about rent," she said. I sat down slowly, my feet screaming after a 10-hour shift. "Rent?" "Yes. Gary and I have been discussing it, and we really think you should pay your fair share for living here. We calculated that $500 a month is reasonable." "This is my house," I said, my voice flat with disbelief. "I own it. The mortgage is in my name." "Exactly," Amber said, as if I'd just proved her point. "You own it, which means you're technically our landlord. And as our landlord, you should be collecting rent. But since we're family, and Gary is your son, we're willing to pay a reduced rate. But that also means you, as another adult living in this household, should contribute equally." The logic was so twisted, so deliberately obtuse, that I couldn't even formulate a response. I just sat there, staring at her. Gary came down the stairs. He'd showered recently, his hair still damp. He'd finally found a job 2 weeks ago, working at an electronics store. It paid minimum wage, and he complained about it constantly, but it was something. "Mom," It makes sense, he said, settling onto the couch next to Amber. We're all adults here. We should all contribute. I pay the mortgage, I repeated slowly. I pay the electric bill, the gas bill, the water bill, the internet, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance. What exactly do you think I'm not contributing? But you live here too, Amber said sweetly. You use the space. It's only fair. I looked at my son. Gary, do you understand that your father and I bought this house? That I've been paying for it for 30 years? That I took out a second mortgage to pay for your college education? Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or discomfort. But then Amber reached over and squeezed his hand, and his expression hardened. I didn't ask to be born, he said quietly. You chose to be a single mother. Those were your choices. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt something crack inside my chest, something that might have been my heart or might have been the last remnants of my denial about what was happening here. I stood up without another word, and went to my room. I closed the door, sat on my bed, and tried to breathe. Tried to understand how I'd arrived at this place where my own son could say such things to me. When I refused to pay the rent, Amber demanded, new rules appeared. I came home from work 3 days later to find my dirty scrubs in a pile outside the bathroom door. What's this? I asked, finding Amber in the kitchen. Oh, new house rule. The washing machine is for household linens, and Gary's, and my clothes only. Your work clothes are your responsibility. There's a laundromat on Maple Street. I stared at her. You're telling me I can't use the washing machine in my own house? Our house, she corrected. And yes, the washing machine uses a lot of water and electricity. Since you're not contributing adequately, it seems fair. So I started hand-washing my scrubs in the bathroom sink. I'd stand there after 12-hour shifts, scrubbing blood and bodily fluids from the fabric, wringing them out, hanging them to dry on a rack in my bedroom. My window faced the street, and I knew the neighbors could see the clothes hanging there. I felt the shame of it, even though I'd done nothing wrong. Mrs. Patterson from next door caught me at the mailbox one afternoon. Deborah, honey, is everything all right? She asked, her eyes concerned. I noticed you've been hanging laundry in your window. Just trying to save some money on the dryer, I lied, forcing a smile. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded and went back to her own yard. I tried to talk to Gary one more time. I waited until Amber was out, running errands, and I knocked on his bedroom door. Gary, can we talk? Just the two of us? He let me in reluctantly. The room looked different. Amber had redecorated, painted over the soft blue I'd chosen, replaced my furniture with modern pieces. Nothing of me remained here. What, Mom? I need you to really hear me, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. This situation, what's happening here, it's not right. This is my home. I welcomed you both here when you needed help. But Amber is trying to push me out. That's not true, he said, but he wouldn't look at me. She's just trying to establish boundaries. Boundaries? Gary, she's controlling what I eat, whether I can wash my clothes, trying to charge me rent in my own house. Can't you see what she's doing? You're being dramatic, he muttered. Amber says you've always had trouble with her, that you never really accepted our marriage. That's not true. I've tried so hard to welcome her, to make her feel like family. Well, maybe you didn't try hard enough. His voice was cold. Amber loves me. She takes care of me. She says you're jealous of what we have. I left the room before I started crying. I couldn't let him see me break down. That night, I lay awake in my small bedroom, listening to Gary and Amber laughing in the master suite. I thought about my late husband, about how he'd be heartbroken to see what his son had become. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, all the double shifts, all the times I'd gone without so Gary could have what he needed. And I wondered how much more I could take before I shattered completely. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. I'd been working ridiculous hours, my body running on fumes and determination. One afternoon during my shift, I felt dizzy. The hospital corridor seemed to tilt. I reached for the wall to steady myself, but the floor rushed up to meet me. I woke up in a hospital bed. My supervisor, Carol, was standing beside me, her face creased with worry. Your blood pressure is through the roof, she said gently. The doctor wants to keep you for observation. Deborah, what's going on? This isn't like you. I wanted to tell her. Wanted to explain everything. But the words wouldn't come. How could I admit that my own son was letting his wife abuse me? How could I say out loud that I was being systematically pushed out of my own home? It sounded insane. Just stress, I whispered. I'll be fine. They kept me for 2 days. Gary never visited. Amber never called. When the hospital finally released me, Carol insisted on driving me home. You need to take care of yourself, she said as we pulled up to my house. Promise me you'll rest. I promised, even though I knew it was a lie. I walked through the front door, still weak, still dizzy, and I stopped dead. My bedroom door was open. Inside, I could see boxes. My clothes were packed away, my personal items wrapped and stored. The bed was stripped bare. Amber appeared in the doorway, her expression one of false sympathy. "Oh, Deborah, you're home. We were so worried about you." She clasped her hands together. "Listen, Gary and I have been talking. After your hospitalization, we realized you're clearly unable to live independently anymore. It's just not safe for you to be here alone all day while we're at work. What if something happens?" "What have you done to my room?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Well, I've been wanting a home office, and since you were in the hospital, we thought it was the perfect time to make the transition. Your things are safely packed in the garage. We looked into some very nice assisted living facilities. There's one about 20 minutes away that has an opening." The room spun again, but this time it had nothing to do with my blood pressure. "You packed up my room," I repeated, "while I was in the hospital." "We're just thinking of your well-being," Amber said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You collapsed at work, Deborah. That's serious. You need proper care." Gary appeared behind her, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, shame. But Amber slipped her arm through his, and whatever I'd seen disappeared. "Mom, maybe it's for the best," he said quietly. I didn't have the strength to argue. I walked past them, through the kitchen, out to the garage. My life was in cardboard boxes, stacked haphazardly between old paint cans and gardening tools. I stood there among the remnants of my existence, and realized I had nowhere to sleep in my own house. That night, I slept on the living room couch. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, wondering how my life had come to this. At 63 years old, after decades of hard work, after raising a child alone, after paying off a mortgage and building a life, I was homeless in my own home. Morning came too soon. I hadn't slept, not really, just dozed in fitful stretches, waking every time I heard a sound. When I finally gave up and sat up, my back was screaming in protest. The couch was old, the springs worn out. I'd been meaning to replace it for years but never had the money. Amber came downstairs early, already dressed and made up. She saw me on the couch and her expression shifted to something I can only describe as calculating. She pulled out her phone and took a picture. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just documenting," she said lightly. "For your own protection, of course. We want to make sure we can show the doctors how you've been living if they ask." Over the next week, she took more pictures. Me sleeping on the couch, me eating a can of soup standing at the kitchen counter because I no longer had a place to sit at a table. Me looking disheveled and exhausted after work. She was building a case, I realized. A case that I was incapable of caring for myself. Then the social worker came. Her name was Jennifer, and she was young, probably in her late 20s. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice, and when Amber called Adult Protective Services claiming concern for me, Jennifer had been assigned to investigate. "Mrs. Deborah Lewis?" she asked when I opened the door. "Yes? I'm Jennifer Morris from Adult Protective Services. I received a call about you. May I come in?" My stomach dropped, but I stepped aside. Amber materialized from the kitchen, playing her role perfectly. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We've been so worried about her. Ever since her collapse, she just hasn't been the same." Jennifer's eyes took in the living room. The couch with my blanket still tangled on it. The makeshift arrangement of my life compressed into one piece of furniture. "Mrs. Lewis, are you sleeping on the couch?" Jennifer asked gently. "It's temporary," I said. "I've been having some health issues." She won't let us help her, Amber interjected, and I was amazed at the tears that appeared in her eyes on command. We've tried to talk to her about assisted living, just until she's stronger, but she gets so hostile. Gary is beside himself with worry. As if summoned, Gary appeared. He looked genuinely distressed. I'll give him that. Maybe he'd even convinced himself this was real, that I was the problem. Mom's been having memory issues too, he said quietly. Forgetting to pay bills, forgetting conversations we've had. That's why she collapsed at work. She's been pushing herself too hard, refusing to admit she needs help. It was all lies. Carefully constructed, well-rehearsed lies. But how could I prove it? How could I explain that they had systematically dismantled my life, that I was being financially and emotionally abused in my own home? To someone looking in from the outside, I probably did look like an elderly woman in decline. Jennifer sat down with me on the couch. She asked me questions about my health, my work, my living situation. I tried to explain, tried to make her understand, but the words came out wrong. I sounded defensive, paranoid even to my own ears. Mrs. Lewis, has anyone ever suggested you might need help managing your affairs? Jennifer asked carefully. My affairs are fine, I said. This is my house. I own it. I've been paying the bills for 30 years. Actually, Gary said, and he pulled out papers from his wallet. I've been helping with the bills lately. Mom gave me access to her accounts because she was having trouble keeping track of everything. That was a partial truth twisted into a complete lie. He'd taken my wallet one day, said he needed to borrow $20 for gas, and instead had photographed my debit card. I'd found charges I hadn't made, and when I confronted him, he said he'd used it for household expenses, and I must have forgotten. Jennifer looked at me with sympathy that felt like pity. Mrs. Lewis, would you be willing to undergo a competency evaluation, just to rule out any cognitive issues? There's nothing wrong with my mind, I said, but my voice sounded desperate even to me. After Jennifer left, Amber was triumphant. She'll recommend an evaluation, and once they find you incompetent, Gary can get power of attorney. Then we can really help you. The threat hung in the air between us. Power of attorney meant Gary would control my finances, my medical decisions, my property. I would cease to exist as an autonomous person. That night, I couldn't stay in the house. I got in my car and drove aimlessly through the dark streets of my town. I ended up in the hospital parking lot, sitting there with the engine off, staring at the building where I'd worked for 37 years. I thought about driving away, just leaving, starting over somewhere else. But where would I go? This was my home, my town, my life. Why should I be the one to leave? My phone buzzed. A text from Helen, my best friend for 20 years. Deborah, I ran into Amber at the grocery store. She seemed very worried about you. Is everything okay? I stared at the message. Amber had gotten to Helen too, spreading her poison, her carefully crafted narrative about poor, declining Deborah who refused help. I didn't respond. I sat there in the dark and felt the walls closing in. The next blow came in the form of legal papers, delivered to the house by a process server. I signed for them with shaking hands and read through the documents with growing horror. Amber had filed for a restraining order against me. The petition claimed I had threatened her and displayed increasingly erratic and aggressive behavior. It was completely fabricated. I had never threatened her, never raised my voice beyond normal conversation. But there it was, in legal language, turning me into a dangerous person in my own home. And underneath the restraining order petition was something worse, a guardianship petition. Amber was seeking legal guardianship over me, claiming I was mentally incompetent and unable to care for myself. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. I read the documents 3 times, unable to process what I was seeing. If Amber won, if a judge granted her guardianship, she would control everything. My money, my medical care, my property, my very existence. I would become a legal child, stripped of all autonomy. She hadn't just been cruel, she'd been methodical. Every action over the past months had been calculated to build toward this moment. The photographs, the witnesses she'd cultivated, the false narrative she'd spread through the neighborhood. It was a con, perfectly executed. And Gary was either too blind or too complicit to stop it. I called the only lawyer I knew, a man named George who'd helped me refinance the house years ago. His secretary told me he'd retired. She gave me a few referrals, but when I called them, the consultation fees alone were more than I could afford. Legal aid had a 6-month waiting list. I sat in my car outside the house, the legal papers in my lap, and for the first time in my adult life, I considered giving up, just signing everything over to them and walking away. Living in a shelter, starting over with nothing, at least I'd be free. But then I thought about my late husband, about the house we'd chosen together, about the life we'd built. I thought about every double shift I'd worked, every sacrifice I'd made. And I felt something harden inside me. Not quite hope, more like defiance. If they wanted to take everything from me, I wasn't going to make it easy. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. I made it through my shift on autopilot, my hands performing tasks my brain had memorized decades ago. But my mind was elsewhere, spinning through possible solutions, all of them dead ends. Carol found me during my lunch break, sitting alone in the staff lounge, staring at a sandwich I couldn't eat. "All right, that's it," she said, closing the door behind her. "You're going to tell me what's really going on, and don't you dare say it's nothing." I looked up at her. Carol had been my supervisor for 15 years, but more than that, she'd been a friend. She'd attended Gary's high school graduation. She'd sent flowers when my husband died. She knew me. And maybe that's why the story finally spilled out. All of it. The refrigerators, the locks, the rent demands, the packed bedroom, the legal papers. I showed her the guardianship petition that I'd been carrying in my purse like evidence of my own impending doom. Carol read through it, her face growing darker with each page. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was fury. "This is elder abuse," she said flatly. "Financial exploitation. Deborah, this is criminal." "It's my son," I whispered. "How can it be criminal when it's my own son?" "I don't care if it's the Pope. This is abuse." She pulled out her phone. "My mother went through something similar. A cousin moved in, started taking control, tried to isolate her. We caught it early, got her a lawyer who specializes in this. His name is Patricia Henley. She works pro bono for elder abuse cases. I can't afford any lawyer, let alone one who charges pro bono rates. Pro bono means free, honey. She does it because she cares." Carol was already dialing. "Patricia? It's Carol Winters from County General. I have a situation you need to hear about." Patricia Henley came to my house the next day. Not the house where Gary and Amber were, but to Carol's house where I'd agreed to meet. Patricia was in her 50s, dressed in a sharp suit, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. I told her everything again. Showed her the legal papers, my receipts for groceries, my bank statements showing the mortgage payments, the photographs on my phone of the locked cabinets and the labeled food. I showed her text messages from Gary, emails from Amber, everything I'd been quietly documenting without even realizing I was building a case. Patricia listened without interruption. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was predatory. "They made a mistake," she said. "What do you mean?" "They got greedy. If they'd been smarter, they would have moved slower. But filing for guardianship this quickly, with this much obvious financial motivation, it shows their hand. And more importantly, it gives us grounds to fight back." She pulled out her laptop. "I'm going to file counter motions. We're going to demand discovery of all financial records, theirs and yours. We're going to subpoena phone records, emails, text messages. We're going to depose everyone involved. And we're going to expose exactly what they've been doing. But the hearing is in 3 weeks. Then we have 3 weeks to build a case. I'll need complete access to everything. Your medical records, employment records, financial statements. I need character witnesses. People who can testify that you're competent, that this whole narrative is fabricated. My supervisor, Carol. And there are doctors at the hospital, nurses I've worked with for decades." "Good. Anyone else?" I thought about Helen, about how Amber had poisoned that relationship. "I don't know. Amber has been spreading stories about me. People think I'm losing my mind. Let them think that for now. It'll make the reveal more satisfying." Patricia's smile widened. I'm going to do some digging into Amber's background. People who pull cons like this usually have a history. A history? This is too calculated to be her first time. Trust me. I moved into Helen's spare bedroom that night. I couldn't stay in that house anymore, not even on the couch. When I called Helen and told her the truth, the whole truth, she cried. Deborah, I'm so sorry. Amber seemed so concerned, so genuine. I should have known better. I should have trusted you. She's good at what she does, I said tiredly. That's what makes it work. Over the next week, Patricia worked fast. She filed motions with the court, requested emergency hearings, began the process of discovery. She sent subpoenas to Amber and Gary, demanding their financial records and communications. She hired a private investigator to look into Amber's past. And what the investigator found was stunning. Amber had been married before. Her first husband, Dennis, had a widowed father named Frank who owned a small house in Pennsylvania. Amber and Dennis moved in to help take care of him. Within 8 months, Frank was in a nursing home. His house had been sold, and Amber had disappeared with most of the money. Frank died alone 6 months later. Dennis, horrified by what had happened, divorced Amber and tried to report her to authorities. But there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. The house sale had been technically legal, signed off by Frank himself, though Dennis swore his father hadn't understood what he was signing. Patricia also found bank records showing wire transfers between Amber and a man named Todd Shepard, regular transfers going back 2 years, before she'd even married Gary. Who's Todd Shepard? Patricia asked me. I have no idea. But Gary would know. Todd had been his best friend in high school. They'd lost touch after graduation, but I remembered him. A charming boy with an easy smile and flexible morals. Patricia tracked down Todd's wife, Emma. When we met with her and showed her the bank records, the wire transfers, she went pale. I thought he was working overtime, she whispered. He said he was working overtime. We showed her more. Text messages retrieved from phone company records, messages between Amber and Todd that dated back 3 years, plans, schemes, an affair that had started before Amber ever met Gary. Emma agreed to testify. She was devastated, humiliated, but she was also angry. And anger, Patricia said, made for excellent testimony. The pieces were coming together. We had evidence of Amber's prior bad acts. We had proof of financial impropriety. We had character witnesses from my hospital who would testify to my competence. We had documentation of everything Amber and Gary had done. But Patricia warned me it might not be enough. Judges are cautious in guardianship cases, she explained. They err on the side of protection. If Amber's lawyer is good, they'll paint you as a proud, elderly woman in denial about her decline. They'll say we're the ones taking advantage of you, manipulating you against your loving family. So what do? We wait, and we hope Gary's conscience wakes up before it's too late. 3 days before the hearing, my phone rang at 2 a.m. I was staying at Helen's, sleeping in fits and starts, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. I grabbed the phone, saw Gary's name on the screen, and almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Mom? His voice was wrecked. He was crying. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Gary, what's wrong? I came home early. I forgot my phone. I saw. He was sobbing now, barely coherent. She was with Todd. In your room. In the room that used to be your room. And I saw her phone. Mom, I saw the messages. All of them. What she did to you. What we did to you. Oh God, what have I done? I held the phone against my ear and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a bone-deep weariness. Where are you now? I asked. I left. I'm in my car. I don't know where to go. Come to Helen's house. Do you remember where she lives? Yeah, I remember. He showed up 20 minutes later, looking like he'd aged a decade. His eyes were red and swollen, his hands shaking. Helen let him in without a word, then left us alone in the living room. Gary collapsed onto the couch and put his head in his hands. She's been lying to me from the beginning. The whole thing. It was all lies. She and Todd, they planned it. All of it. Getting me to propose, moving in with you, taking over the house. It was always about the house. I know. I said quietly. You knew? Patricia found out. The lawyer. She's been investigating. He looked up at me, and I saw my son again. Not the stranger who'd been living in my house, but the boy I'd raised. The one I thought I'd lost. I destroyed everything, he whispered. I let her destroy you. My own mother. How can you even look at me? You're my son, I said simply. That doesn't change. You don't deserve her forgiveness. Maybe not. But you're going to have to earn it. We talked through the night. He told me everything. How Amber had isolated him from friends. How she'd gradually convinced him that I was the problem. How she'd made him dependent on her emotionally. How she'd gaslit him so thoroughly that he'd stopped trusting his own perception of reality. I thought I loved her, he said. But I don't think I even knew her. The real her. What are you going to do? I asked. Whatever you need. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. I'll make this right. It won't be easy. I know. But I have to try. The next morning, Gary went with Patricia to give a formal statement. He provided text messages from his phone, emails, recorded conversations. He laid bare every manipulation, every lie, every scheme. Patricia's investigator had already found most of it, but having Gary's testimony, having the inside perspective, it made everything concrete. Patricia called me that afternoon. We have enough, more than enough. But Deborah, you need to prepare yourself for tomorrow. What do you mean? Amber's going to fight. Her lawyer is going to attack you, try to discredit Gary's testimony, paint this whole thing as a family squabble that got out of hand. It's going to be ugly. I can handle ugly. I know you can. That's why we're going to win. The hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning. I arrived early with Patricia, dressed in my best outfit, a simple navy dress I'd worn to Gary's college graduation. Helen came with me for support, and Carol took the day off work to be there. Gary was already in the courthouse hallway when we arrived. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept. Amber was there too, across the hall with her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. She saw me, and her expression flickered. For just a moment, I saw uncertainty. Then her mask slipped back into place. We filed into the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Catherine Brennan. She had a reputation for being no-nonsense and fair. Patricia had told me that was good for us. Amber's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of a dedicated daughter-in-law trying to help her elderly mother-in-law, who refused to accept her declining health. He showed Jennifer Morris's report from Adult Protective Services, noting concern about my living conditions. He showed photographs of me sleeping on the couch, eating standing up, looking disheveled and confused. Mrs. Lewis is a proud woman, he said smoothly. A nurse who spent her life caring for others. It's understandable that she would resist acknowledging her own need for care. But the evidence is clear. She collapsed at work. She's been displaying signs of cognitive decline. She needs help, and her family is trying to provide it. Then it was Patricia's turn. She stood up slowly, deliberately. Your Honor, this is not a case about an elderly woman needing care. This is a case about elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. The courtroom went silent. Patricia presented everything methodically. The bank records showing I'd been paying all the bills, the receipts proving I'd been buying my own groceries while being denied access to the kitchen, the photographs of locked cabinets, the testimony from my supervisor and co-workers at the hospital, all affirming my mental competence. Then she dropped the bomb. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence of Miss Amber Lewis's prior conduct. She presented the investigator's findings about Frank, about the Pennsylvania house, about the pattern of behavior. Amber's lawyer objected, but Judge Brennan overruled him. I'm going to hear this. Patricia showed the wire transfers to Todd, the text messages planning the scheme, the affair that predated the marriage. Emma's testimony, delivered via video deposition, describing how her husband and Amber had been conspiring together. I watched Amber's face as her carefully constructed world fell apart. The mask cracked. Her calm facade crumbled, replaced by something cold and calculating, her true self finally visible. Then Gary took the stand. He was nervous, stumbling over his words at first. But as he told his story, as he described how Amber had manipulated him, isolated him, turned him against his own mother, his voice grew stronger. "I was a fool," he said, looking directly at the judge. "I believed her lies. I participated in abusing my mother. I helped push her out of her own home. I stood by while Amber tried to steal everything my mother worked for. I have no excuse. I just want to make sure the truth comes out." Amber's lawyer tried to cross-examine him, tried to suggest he was lying to protect himself. But Gary didn't waver. Finally, I took the stand. Patricia asked me to tell my story in my own words. So I did. I talked about the refrigerators, the locks, the rent demands, the packed bedroom. I talked about sleeping on the couch, washing my scrubs by hand, being systematically erased from my own life. I talked about the love I had for my son, and how that love had been weaponized against me. When I finished, Judge Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I've been on the bench for 23 years. I've seen a lot of things. But this is one of the more egregious cases of elder abuse I've encountered." She looked at Amber. "Miss Lewis, you systematically targeted a vulnerable woman, manipulated her son, and attempted to steal her home and assets through legal means. The guardianship petition is not only denied, but I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." Amber's face went white. "Furthermore, I'm issuing an immediate order for Miss Amber Lewis to vacate the property at 412 Maple Street within 24 hours. Mrs. Deborah Lewis is to be restored to full possession of her home and property." The gavel came down. Amber's lawyer was already talking about appeals, but Patricia was smiling. "They can appeal all they want. You won." And just like that, it was over. Amber was arrested in the courthouse. They charged her with elder abuse, fraud, and attempted theft. The district attorney was enthusiastic about the case. Apparently, they'd been trying to prosecute financial exploitation of elderly victims more aggressively, and this was a perfect test case. Todd was arrested the next day. His wife Emma filed for divorce within the week. Gary stood in the courthouse hallway looking lost. "What do I do now?" he asked me. "You figure out who you are without someone telling you," I said. "You get therapy, you get a job, you get your own place, you stand on your own 2 feet. Will you ever forgive me?" "I don't know. Ask me again in a year." Patricia helped me file a restraining order against Amber. She also helped me change all the locks on the house, cancel any credit cards Gary might have had access to, and secure my financial accounts. When I walked back into my house for the first time as its sole occupant, it felt strange, empty. Amber's things were gone, removed by police escort. The second refrigerator had been taken too, evidence in the criminal case. The locks were off the cabinets. My breakfast table was back in its place, retrieved from wherever Amber had stored it. But the house felt haunted. Every room held memories of the last 6 months, of the systematic dismantling of my life, of my son choosing his wife over his mother, of my own helplessness and despair. Helen helped me clean, top to bottom. We scrubbed away Amber's presence, repainted the master bedroom back to its original soft blue, donated all the furniture she'd bought to charity. It took weeks, but slowly, the house became mine again. Gary kept his distance, respecting the space I'd asked for, but he texted occasionally, small things. "I'm in therapy. I got a job at the hospital, in maintenance. I found an apartment." Each message was a small step toward redemption. I went back to work, but I cut my hours. I was tired. The whole ordeal had aged me in ways that went beyond years. Carol understood, helped me restructure my schedule so I worked 3 days a week instead of 5. The trial happened 6 months later. Amber's lawyer tried to argue that she'd acted out of genuine concern for me, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution. I didn't attend the sentencing. I'd said my piece during the trial. I didn't need to see her face again. Todd got 2 years and a hefty fine. Emma got the house, the kids, and her dignity back. And Gary? Gary kept trying. He came to family therapy sessions with me, twice a month. He worked his maintenance job at the hospital, and sometimes I'd see him in the hallways, emptying trash cans or fixing a door. He'd wave, tentatively, and I'd wave back. Small gestures, baby steps. One day, 9 months after the trial, He showed up at my door with a small potted plant. "It's a peace lily," he said. "The lady at the nursery said they're supposed to represent new beginnings." I took the plant. "Thank you. Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. He came in slowly, looking around at the house he'd helped nearly destroy. "It looks good," he said. "It looks like it used to. I've been working on it." We sat at the kitchen table, the little oak one that had survived Amber's reign. I made coffee, and we drank it in silence for a while. "I've been reading about narcissistic abuse," Gary said finally. "About how people like Amber operate, how they find vulnerable targets and manipulate them. I'm not making excuses. What I did was wrong, all of it. But I'm trying to understand how I let it happen. And I think I was lonely. After Dad died, you were so strong, so capable. You handled everything. And I felt like I could never measure up to you. Could never be as strong as you needed me to be. When Amber came along, she made me feel needed. She made me feel important. I didn't see that she was using that against me until it was too late. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He'd lost weight. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there a year ago. He looked older, but also somehow more present, more himself. I loved your father very much," I said quietly. "When he died, I had to be strong because you needed me to be. But that didn't mean I wasn't scared. I was terrified. I just couldn't show it. I never knew that. You were 12. You didn't need to know." We talked for hours that day. Really talked, maybe for the first time in years. About his father, about the mistakes we'd both made, about the future. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. A foundation we could build on. Over the next 6 months, Gary came by regularly. He helped with repairs around the house, fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, painted the fence. He never asked to move back in, and I never offered. But slowly, carefully, we rebuilt something that resembled a relationship. On what would have been my husband's 70th birthday, Gary and I went to the cemetery together. We stood at the grave, and Gary cried. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't protect Mom. I'm sorry I let you down." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Your father loved you. He'd want you to forgive yourself eventually. Have you forgiven me?" I thought about that question, about forgiveness and trust, and whether they were the same thing. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "But Gary, forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. It means we move forward into something new. I can live with that." It's been 2 years now since that day I came home to find a second refrigerator in my kitchen. 2 years since my daughter-in-law told me to buy my own food. 2 years since I thought I'd lost everything. My life looks different now. I still work at the hospital, but part-time. I've taken up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. My little watercolors aren't great, but they bring me joy, and that's enough. Gary and I have dinner together once a week, sometimes at my house, sometimes at his apartment. We're careful with each other, kind. The easy closeness we once had is gone, replaced by something more measured, more intentional. But it's real, it's honest, and that counts for something. He's dating someone new, a kind woman named Rachel, who works at the hospital in physical therapy. She knows the whole story. Gary told her on their second date, laid it all out, every mistake he'd made. She appreciated his honesty. They take things slow. I've become something of an advocate in the community. I speak at senior centers about elder financial abuse, about warning signs and resources. Patricia asked me to testify before the state legislature about proposed laws to protect elderly homeowners from exploitation. I told my story to a room full of lawmakers, and 3 months later, they passed new protections. The house is fully mine again, every room cleaned, every trace of Amber erased. But more than that, I've made it mine in new ways. I turned the master bedroom into a studio where I paint. I sleep in the smaller guest room, and I like it better. It's cozy, it's enough. Helen and I are closer than ever. She apologized 100 times for doubting me, but I told her that's how people like Amber work. They're convincing. They prey on our desire to think the best of others. Carol retired from nursing last year, and we have lunch together every Thursday. She tells me I saved her faith in the system, that seeing justice actually work restored something she thought she'd lost. As for Amber, I heard she got out of prison early for good behavior. She moved to another state. I hope she's changed, but I doubt it. People like that rarely do. I just hope she doesn't find another victim. And Todd? Last I heard, he was working at a car dealership 2 towns over. Emma got remarried, to a man who actually deserves her. I sent them a wedding card. I learned some hard truths through this experience. I learned that love without boundaries isn't really love, it's enabling. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I learned that my value as a person isn't measured by what I provide for others, but by who I am in my heart. I learned that women my age, women in their 60s and 70s, are not invisible. Society tries to make us disappear, tries to silence us, tries to convince us we're burdens, but we have voices. We have power. We have rights. And we don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from family. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you can hurt you the most. And that's not your fault. It's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their brokenness. Most importantly, I learned about the surprise I prepared, the one that made them wake up crying. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply truth. The truth, delivered at the right moment, with the right evidence, is the most powerful weapon against injustice. The surprise was showing up. It was refusing to disappear. It was fighting back when they expected me to crumble. It was saying no when they expected compliance. It was standing in that courtroom and telling my story when they expected silence. That's the surprise they never saw coming. That I had strength left. That I had people who believed me. That I wouldn't go quietly into the nursing home or the shadows or the margins where they wanted to push me. And yes, they woke up crying. Gary cried when he realized what he'd done, what he'd almost lost. Amber cried when she was convicted. Todd cried when his wife left him. They all cried because consequences have a way of making people face reality. But I cried too. I cried tears of relief and release and recovery. I cried for the months I'd lost, for the relationship with my son that would never be the same, for the innocence I'd had about family and loyalty. And then I wiped my tears, painted my bedroom blue, and started living again. If you're going through something similar, if you're being pushed out of your own life by people who claim to love you, please know this. You are not crazy. You are not imagining it. You are not the problem. And you don't have to accept it. Document everything. Take photos. Keep receipts. Tell someone you trust. Find a lawyer who specializes in elder law. Call Adult Protective Services yourself, before someone else calls them about you. Take control of the narrative before someone else writes it for you. And know that you are valuable. You are worthy. You deserve respect and dignity and safety in your own home. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. My story could have ended differently. I could have ended up in a nursing home, stripped of my autonomy, my home stolen, my life erased. But I fought back, and I won. Not because I'm special or particularly brave, but because I refused to give up, because I found people who believed me, because I stood up and said no. You can too. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where family betrayed your trust? How did you handle it? What would you do if you found yourself in a similar situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling right now. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to the reality of elder abuse, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and understand what's happening behind closed doors in homes, just like yours and mine. And please subscribe to this channel. Every week, I share stories of everyday people facing extraordinary challenges. Stories of survival, of courage, of fighting back against injustice. Your subscription helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them. Finally, share this story. Share it with your friends, your family, your community. Elder abuse happens more often than we want to admit, and awareness is the first step toward prevention. You never know whose life might be changed by hearing this message. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for caring, for taking the time to understand what happened to me and to so many others like me. I hope you take care of yourself, protect yourself, and know your worth. You are never too old to start over. You are never too weak to fight back. And you are never alone. Until next time, stay strong, stay aware, and remember that home is not just a place, it's where you're respected, where you're safe, and where you're valued for who you are. Take care of yourselves.